The world is in shock. Diana, Princess of Wales, is dead, and Britain is in mourning.
The British Press Association, citing unnamed British sources, has reported that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died.
The news reports that washed across screens in the early hours spoke with disbelief and restraint, announcing that a woman known to the world as a living fairy tale had died in the darkness of a Paris tunnel. Anchors struggled to maintain composure, carefully chosen words barely concealing the shock beneath their voices. And even as those sentences settled into a heavy silence, it was immediately clear that the headlines were only the surface of something far deeper, far more unsettling and far more human than the story they dared to tell. In the hours that followed the crash in Paris on 31st August 1997, confusion turned into obsession. Questions emerged almost instantly, questions that refused to fade, questions that continue to echo decades later. Questions about speed and pursuit, about power and privacy, about responsibility and recklessness, and about a life that, to many, seemed cursed by destiny itself from the moment the world first laid eyes on her. That night would become one of the most dissected tragedies of modern history, a collision not only of steel and concrete, but of myth and reality, of innocence and institution, of love and relentless scrutiny. Welcome to Starlit Mystery. Long before she became the most photographed woman on Earth, Diana Frances Spencer entered the world quietly on 1st July 1961. She was born at Park House near Sandringham in Norfolk, a place of privilege but not peace, though the Spencer family's aristocratic lineage placed them close to the British royal household. Emotional security was far from guaranteed within their walls. From her earliest years, Diana grew up in an environment marked by expectation, disappointment, and unspoken tension. Her parents, John Spencer and Frances Roche, were locked into a marriage strained by one consuming pressure, the need to produce a male heir. Before Diana's birth, the loss of a baby boy had left emotional scars that never healed. When Diana was born, disappointment quietly lingered, and when her brother Charles finally arrived, the damage had already been done. The family's emotional fractures did not mend. They deepened. By the time Diana was still a child, her parents' marriage had collapsed into bitterness and public legal warfare. Arguments were no longer whispered. Affection disappeared. Love became conditional. The divorce, finalized in 1969, forced Diana into a life split between households. A young girl shuttled between parents, who were too consumed by conflict to notice the quiet damage being done. Those close to her later described Diana as deeply sensitive, painfully shy, and emotionally fragile. She craved reassurance but rarely felt secure enough to ask for it. Even at a young age, she developed a fear of abandonment, a belief that love could vanish without warning. This emotional blueprint, formed long before cameras ever followed her, would quietly shape every relationship she entered. Diana's schooling reflected her internal struggles. At Riddlesworth Hall and later at West Heath Girls' School, she was not academically gifted. She failed her O-level examinations twice, an experience that reinforced her sense of inadequacy. Yet while she struggled in the classroom, teachers noticed something else, an unusual emotional intelligence. Diana was intuitive, empathetic, and deeply attuned to the feelings of others. She found refuge in music and dance, disciplines that allowed her to express emotions she could not easily put into words. Dance, in particular, became a private escape, a way to disappear into movement when the world felt overwhelming. She also showed an early inclination toward caring roles, gravitating naturally toward children and animals, where affection felt simpler and safer. After leaving school, Diana drifted into ordinary work. She became a nanny, a housekeeper, and eventually a kindergarten assistant. These were humble roles, far removed from palaces and ceremony. In these spaces, she was anonymous, unjudged, and momentarily free. She had no grand ambition for power or prominence. If anything, Diana seemed happiest when unseen. But destiny, as it often does, had already chosen its path. Her first encounter with Prince Charles occurred in 1977, during a visit to her family home. At the time, he was dating her older sister, and Diana barely registered in his world. She was young, awkward, and painfully self-conscious. Yet over time, circumstances shifted. By the late 1970s, pressure mounted on Charles to marry. The monarchy needed stability. The crown needed heirs. By 1980, Diana had re-entered the picture, not as a sister in the background, but as a potential solution. When their relationship became public, Diana's life fractured overnight. Paparazzi appeared outside her workplace. Reporters analyzed her expressions, her posture, her clothes. Headlines speculated endlessly about her virginity, her temperament, her suitability to become queen. She was barely 19, emotionally unprepared, psychologically overwhelmed, and, quietly, terrified. The engagement announcement on 24 February 1981 ignited a level of global fixation rarely seen before. Diana became an international symbol almost instantly. Photographs showed a shy young woman smiling, nervously, beside the heir to the throne. The world saw romance. Diana felt dread. Behind closed doors, doubts multiplied. Diana later admitted that before the wedding, she became aware of Prince Charles's enduring emotional attachment to Camilla Parker Bowles. The realization devastated her. The fairy tale she had been sold began to crumble before it had even begun. Yet tradition left no room for hesitation. The machinery of monarchy was already in motion. On 29 July 1981, Diana married Prince Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral. The ceremony was watched by hundreds of millions around the globe. It was described as magical, historic, and perfect. But within the grandeur lay quiet despair. As Diana walked down the aisle, she was entering not just a marriage, but an institution that demanded silence, obedience, and emotional restraint. Marriage did not bring safety. It brought exposure. Royal life proved suffocating. Diana's every movement was monitored. Her body became public property. Her emotions were scrutinized, mocked, and weaponized by tabloids that thrived on vulnerability. Within the early years of marriage, Diana developed bulimia, a condition she later linked directly to emotional neglect, loss of control, and relentless pressure. Food became both comfort and punishment. Control over her body became the only control she felt she had left. The birth of Prince William in 1982 offered a brief sense of grounding. Motherhood awakened something fierce and protective in Diana. She rejected cold formality, choosing instead warmth, touch, and emotional presence. When Prince Harry was born in 1984, her devotion deepened. She wanted her sons to feel loved in ways she never had. Yet even motherhood became contested ground. Palace insiders criticized her emotional openness, viewing it as instability rather than strength. Diana's attempts to modernize motherhood clashed with an institution rooted in restraint. By the mid-1980s, a paradox emerged. Diana had become more popular than the monarchy itself. Crowds responded to her instinctively. They sensed authenticity. Her compassion felt real, unpolished, human. This was most evident in 1987 when Diana publicly embraced AIDS patients at a time when fear and misinformation dominated public discourse. She did not flinch. She did not distance herself. She touched those others feared to touch. In doing so, she redefined royal duty, not as distance, but as connection. The public adored her, but admiration became another form of captivity. Diana could not escape the image projected onto her. She was both worshipped and consumed. Behind palace walls, her marriage continued to decay. Emotional distance turned into resentment. Both Diana and Charles sought solace elsewhere. Searching for validation they no longer found at home. This quiet collapse would soon explode into public scandal. As the 1980s drew to a close, the fractures within Diana's marriage were no longer confined to palace corridors. What had once been whispered behind closed doors now leaked into the public sphere through subtle gestures, strained appearances, and an unmistakable emotional distance between husband and wife. Diana, once positioned as the monarchy's greatest asset, had become an uncomfortable reminder of everything the institution struggled to contain. Prince Charles, emotionally tethered to Camilla Parker Bowles, increasingly withdrew. Diana, left isolated within the rigid structure of royal life, searched desperately for reassurance, for intimacy, for someone who would see her not as a symbol, but as a woman. That search led her in 1986 to James Hewitt, a cavalry officer assigned to help her with riding lessons. What began as companionship soon deepened into a romantic relationship. For Diana, Hewitt represented validation, attention, and emotional refuge. But in a world where privacy was an illusion, the affair could not remain hidden. When it became public in the early 1990s, the media response was unforgiving. Diana was portrayed as unstable, impulsive, and morally flawed. The same tabloids that once crowned her a fairy tale princess now sharpened their knives. What the headlines failed to capture was context. This was not reckless indulgence, but emotional survival. Diana had spent years feeling invisible within her own marriage, silenced by protocol and tradition. Her choices, however imperfect, were driven by loneliness rather than malice. By the early 1990s, the monarchy itself was under strain. Public trust was eroding. The royal family appeared distant, rigid, and increasingly out of touch with a changing world. And at the center of this tension stood Diana, uncontrollable, unpredictable, deeply human. The year 1992 would shatter any remaining illusion. On 16th of June 1992, journalist Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story. The book detonated like a cultural bomb. Inside its pages were revelations that stunned the world. Diana's bulimia, her self-harm, her suicide attempts, her crushing loneliness, and her sense of betrayal. Though officially described as unauthorized, it later emerged that Diana herself had secretly cooperated, recording tapes that formed the backbone of the narrative. It was an act of desperation and defiance. For the first time, Diana reclaimed her voice. She exposed the emotional cost of royal life, puncturing the carefully maintained image of perfection. The monarchy was furious. The press was relentless. The public, however, was captivated, not by scandal, but by vulnerability. Later that year, on 9th December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced the formal separation of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. The fairy tale was officially over. What followed was not peace, but prolonged public dissection. Every move Diana made was analyzed. Every relationship was speculated upon. Private conversations were leaked. Intimate phone calls were published. The boundaries between public interest and personal cruelty dissolved entirely. Yet even amid the chaos, Diana evolved. The infamous television interview broadcast on 20th of November 1995 marked a turning point. Sitting alone beneath studio lights, Diana spoke with remarkable calm. She acknowledged her mental health struggles. She admitted to her affair, and she delivered a line that would echo through history. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. In that moment, Diana shattered royal silence. She did not beg for sympathy. She offered honesty. The public responded with overwhelming support. But within the monarchy, the consequences were severe. Diana had crossed an unspoken line. The divorce was finalized on 28 days, August 1996. Though she retained significant financial settlement and continued to live at Kensington Palace, Diana lost the title of Her Royal Highness. To the institution, it was a procedural adjustment. To Diana, it was a symbolic exile, a reminder that she was no longer protected, no longer inside the walls that had both confined and shielded her. And yet, paradoxically, freedom followed. Without the constraints of royal protocol, Diana began to redefine herself. No longer bound by expectation, she poured her energy into humanitarian causes with renewed intensity. Her work with HIV/AIDS patients expanded. She championed homeless charities. She visited hospitals privately, without cameras, offering comfort to those society ignored. But it was her campaign against landmines that marked her most fearless transformation. In January 1997, Diana traveled to Angola, walking through active minefields wearing protective gear. The images were powerful, not because they were staged, but because they were confrontational. She forced global attention onto a humanitarian crisis, long ignored. Critics accused her of naivety. Supporters saw courage. The impact was undeniable. Her advocacy accelerated international momentum toward a landmine ban. Diana was no longer just a symbol of compassion. She was a disruptor. In her personal life, however, peace remained elusive. In the summer of 1997, she began a relationship with Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed. Their romance unfolded publicly, almost aggressively so, fueled by paparazzi obsession. Photographers pursued them across yachts, beaches, and cities, turning intimacy into spectacle. Some believed Diana was deeply in love. Others felt she was seeking safety, excitement, or escape. Those close to her described a woman oscillating between happiness and exhaustion. She longed for quiet, for anonymity, yet found herself more exposed than ever. On 21st July 1997, Diana made what would become her final public appearance in London, attending a charity auction at Christie's. She sold many of her iconic gowns, dresses that had defined an era of her life. The moment felt symbolic. She was shedding the skin of a princess, letting go of the image that had both empowered and imprisoned her. Weeks later, she traveled to Paris. On the night of 31st of August 1997, Diana and Dodi left the Hotel Ritz shortly after midnight. Their driver, Henri Paul, attempted to evade the pursuing paparazzi. Moments later, inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the car crashed at high speed. Diana, Dodi, and Henri Paul were killed. Only bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones survived. The news stunned the world. Official investigations concluded that excessive speed and intoxication were key factors. French and British inquiries dismissed foul play, yet public doubt persisted. The role of paparazzi, security failures, and unanswered inconsistencies fueled endless speculation. For many, the truth felt incomplete, buried beneath bureaucracy and grief. On 6 September 1997, Diana's funeral brought the world to a standstill. Millions lined the streets of London. Billions watched in silence. The grief was raw, overwhelming, and unmistakably personal. This was not mourning for royalty alone. It was mourning for a woman who had reflected the public's own struggles, fears, and vulnerabilities. Her death forced a reckoning. The monarchy, shaken by public outrage, was compelled to modernize. Emotional distance gave way, briefly, to humility. Diana's sons, William and Harry, walked behind her coffin, a moment that would haunt and define them forever. In the years since, Diana's legacy has deepened rather than faded. Her sons have spoken openly about her warmth, her flaws, and her lasting influence. Charities she championed continue their work. Her approach to compassion, physical, fearless, human, reshaped global perceptions of leadership and empathy. Yet unresolved questions remain. Not only about how she died, but about the cost of turning a human being into a myth.
On the scene within
Princess Diana lived beneath a spotlight that revealed everything except peace.
Would the Globe pay
She was
for those
adored,
photos?
yet isolated.
Those photos?
Powerful, yet powerless.
That's something that we would deal with on
Celebrated, yet
a
consumed.
per-case basis. I wouldn't
The
want to
news
comment on
reports
that
that
at this
announced her
point.
death told the world that a princess was gone. But they could never fully capture the story of a woman who challenged tradition simply by being human. And as those headlines fade into history, the echo of her life remains. A haunting reminder that some stars burn brightest just before the darkness closes in.